Hey folks, thanks for watching. I want to cover a lot in this video. I'll be frank with respect to the weather. We've seen a lot of it yesterday on Monday. More of that is to come this week. Eric, he ended the video yesterday with this, correct messaging that we had to have caution with respect to the weather across the Western Corn Belt yesterday evening. And that ended up being correct. The right message to say, because we saw these intense thunderstorm wind events. One came through northern Iowa. We saw kind of what we will call a separate one through eastern Minnesota. They sort of merged at the end of their life cycle. We'll look at those reports, the ingredients that went into that setup. We see some similar ingredients today, so we're going to have to talk about some severe weather, maybe not to the same degree, but the Storm Prediction Center highlighting a slight risk over a similar geography there as well. All the while, we're in the midst of this heat wave across the Midwest and the Southeast. We're going to talk about that. A cool down is on its way. That's kind of already started across the northern plains. My brains, I'm trying to think of the next thing. We got the central and eastern Pacific, the tropics and hurricanes. They're heating up there. That's related to this MJO story that Eric and I have been trying to pin down for the last 2 weeks, as that's probably on its way over to the Atlantic, where we would, suspect that we might see tropical development pick up a bit, where it has been largely suppressed over the last 2 weeks or so. And that all is at the end of this video, somehow, some way, if you stay with me, is going to morph into a August outlook with, has quite a bit of uncertainty right now with some split signals in the model. So it's going to be fun. I want to look through it. I'm starting here. This is yesterday. This is a map of total precipitable water. That's actually kind of the contour you can see here in this kind of blue and teal color. Now, big picture, we see our greatest moisture values in the atmosphere down near the equator. But of course, this time of year, we can pull some of these up into the central part of the country. And we saw that yesterday. If you look over the northern plains, maybe even the central plains here, this is northwest Iowa, southern Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, and see pretty high values here relative to how far north we are on this map. And what we saw here, I'm also plotting these surface streamlines. You can see those pushing that moisture up out of the south, actually kind of converging it right here along this front in northwest Iowa and eastern South Dakota. Now, it always concerns us when we see tropical moisture surge this far north, but we are extra concerned when we see it underneath a lot of wind shear. So that's winds changing with height, often out of the west as you go up with height, and then speed increasing all the while. So I'm going to take this wind, these streamlines at the surface, and we're just going to go up to like 500 millibars. Man, you can see there's that wind shear. So it's one thing to have tropical moisture in the southeast, but without wind shear, you're not going to see these significant severe weather developments. But as you start to pull this moisture further to the north, over Iowa, over South Dakota, and that wind shear over the top of it, that starts to organize those severe thunderstorm complexes. Unfortunately, saw that last night. Now, if I take this up to 250 millibars, that's jet stream level winds. I mean, it's just absolutely cranking over that tropical, corn-fed juice that's now over northern Iowa last night. So unfortunately, that was kind of the fuel that we saw for some of these systems. I pulled up a HER modeled sounding for this time. These are ridiculous graphics. You often see Eric and I going to pull these up in April or May when we're talking about tornado forecasting or severe storm forecasting. Now, there's a lot going on, but what we're really seeing here is temperature in southeastern South Dakota. That's kind of just west of Sioux Falls before this event kicked off yesterday evening. This red line is temperature with respect to height. So as you go up in this graph, you're going up in the atmosphere and temperatures are falling. And we actually kind of skew the graph a little bit because of that. So we call it a skew T diagram because temperature is skewed, frankly. We also plot moisture. That is plotted here. And you can see 93 degrees Fahrenheit temperature estimated by the HER yesterday, 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Dew point very moist. But notice that as you go up in height, temperature starts to decrease rapidly. But moisture doesn't decrease quite as rapidly. We had a ton of this deep tropical moisture. That's what we were seeing here yesterday, and some of those high total precipitable water values. Now you get to a point, kind of in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, and it starts to dry out very quickly, and it starts to get cold very quickly in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's indicative of that kind of wind shear that's up here in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. So you have very warm 93 degree Fahrenheit air, very moist 74 degree Fahrenheit over kind of a deep layer here. And then just above that, you're cold and dry. So there's, if you can kind of flip this graph sideways, you see very warm and wet underneath, very cold and dry. And that is your kind of recipe for a big storm system. And this dry air here, circle that. You can see the winds are kind of out of the west-southwest. We just where's that air coming from out of the west-southwest? Well, it's coming from the high elevations of the southwestern desert, the Four Corners region. We can actually see it's dry here, so you're actually transporting. We actually call that an elevated mix layer. And usually these big severe weather events, anywhere in the Midwest or the plains, one of these is often kind of the smoking gun culprit when we look back at the event. So not surprised to see this. When we saw this show up yesterday evening, the concern for that Derecho-like event increased pretty quickly. And it's just a recipe for explosive thunderstorm development. We saw supercells develop across South Dakota. Some of these had some very photogenic tornadoes associated with them early, but they quickly congealed one into a wind event in Minnesota. And then this textbook bow echo that just ripped through northern Iowa. We had a 99-mile-an-hour wind gust at one point, I think, near Sioux City from a personal weather station, a 92 or an 88 at the airport. And these significant wind events reported south of Sioux Falls and just tore all the way across near Spencer, Iowa, all the way toward Mason City. And at the end of these two respective storms' life, as they kind of merge, and then they turned along with that ridge shape, kind of southeastern part of the state of Iowa, even through Illinois overnight. And this is actually still going, albeit significantly weaker, but we might have a shelf cloud moving through maybe the Chicago area this morning at sunrise, or through central Illinois or western Illinois. So have to keep an eye on kind of weak storms continuing to evaporate here over the middle part of the state. If we look closer just at the Sioux Falls radar, man, you can see that bow echo developing. And again, what you can kind of notice if I replay this loop here is all that moisture in the low levels of the atmosphere is being lifted up by these strong thunderstorms, and then it's evaporating quickly in that mid-level of the atmosphere, and it's actually that cooling and that mid-level evaporation. You kind of notice that here with the echoes disappearing quickly. That helped to fuel some of the strong outflow and the downburst-like winds associated with these thunderstorms. So it is neat seeing it all come together. What's not neat is that we're likely looking at a wide swath of damage here, perhaps through some crops. We'll have to look at NDVI, I think, next week, so that might show up. And then, of course, damage to property, homes, and potential power outages. We zoom in here. I'm looking at both thunderstorm wind events. So I'm going to we'll call this one Event A. This is through southeastern South Dakota. All of these black squares are where we saw significant severe winds reported. The blue are your typical severe winds. In the earlier life cycle, we saw hail, some tornado reports through central South Dakota. And then this Minnesota event here, this is in the southeastern portion of the state, went through the Twin Cities, kind of ramped up toward Eau Claire, and then merged as they both kind of went through eastern Iowa here. I would expect the wind reports in this kind of wedge here to fill in as time goes on. We might even see some show up more so in Illinois here. Because this came through late overnight, right? Not a lot of people out looking for damage or reporting some of these the wind reports here. So these very well might fill in, and we'll have a proper Derecho. I don't know, maybe two, or how they'll define that, but we'll see at the end of the day. And again, today, looking at a number of heat advisories, extreme heat warnings throughout the middle Mississippi River Valley. These extend all the way down through Florida, where it has been very hot. And often in July and August, you can look at the kind of the nose of the heat, if you will, for severe weather development. So yesterday, we saw a lot of this heat pushing up, some extreme heat warnings into Iowa and South Dakota, kind of right at the nose of that, where we saw those jet stream level winds ripping across. That's where we saw the greatest severe weather development. So we kind of practiced that same exercise today, right? The nose of that heat. It's maybe you have one here, maybe one here over Indiana, but definitely kind of up in this corridor here, might expect still some of that wind shear and perhaps some severe storms to keep an eye on. I do want to jump over and quickly look at the last 10 days. So this is the last 10 days of temperature anomalies. So July 18th through July 28th. And I'm bringing this up because you can just see the heat has been anchored here over Florida. We saw temperature records being broken near Tampa, some other municipalities there. And it has pushed up at times into St. Louis. We saw a number of extreme heat warnings. Those continue today across the middle Mississippi River Valley. And that heat at times expanding along with that moisture, right? Fueling some of these thunderstorm wind events in Minnesota or South Dakota or Iowa. Expecting that to continue today. This is the SBC, their day one outlook. You can see a wide area of slight risk through southeastern Montana, all the way through western Iowa. So a little bit similar of a corridor that we saw yesterday. See that stretching even into northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, northwest Indiana. So kind of the same areas that just looking at those heat advisories where we tried to identify that severe weather risk. That does shift to the east as we go through the day on Wednesday. So that cold front that I talked about earlier, that cool down is coming. So it's kind of sagging in like this. And that severe weather potentially following it, albeit only at a marginal right now, one of the lowest levels here from the Storm Prediction Center, their convective outlook here. But again, that is where we're expecting the thunderstorm development over the next 48 hours. If we look at the precipitable water anomalies, so this is kind of similar to that first chart I looked at, but actually looking at just the anomalies themselves. I'm going to take this forecast into Tuesday afternoon here. And you'll notice as we get into Tuesday evening, those precipitable water values ticking back up over this corridor here, right along that slight risk from the Storm Prediction Center. So we still have flow in the atmosphere here and still looking at a widespread area of significant thunderstorm development, some of which might be severe. Those current temperatures as they're recording this morning, it's about 6 a.m. here, and you can see already 75 here in central Illinois. Omaha 78 to 77, already up into the 80s in the middle Mississippi River Valley. That's where we saw those extreme heat warnings up to 80 near Jacksonville. And then if we jump over and look at the NDFD high temperature forecast today, we can see a wide area of mid to high 90s, potentially getting up near 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Memphis, 98 in Nashville. Maybe mid-90s here across the central and eastern Corn Belt, down to the low 90s up by Chicago toward Lansing, Michigan. But just a wide area of heat continues today. The eastern coast metropolis is involved in this. So look at Boston, New York, down through Philadelphia into the mid to high 90s. So impressive heat across a wide area of the country today. Those heat advisories are out and posted. And again, there's that cold front, right, pushing along with those storms further to the south. So as I take this forecast from Tuesday into Wednesday, now we're through Wichita, toward Kansas City, through central Illinois, getting in on this cool down here with those storms over this area expected, right? That activity is shifting east tomorrow. And the heat lingering here across the south and the southeast. But then Thursday, cool down continues south and east. By Friday, all the way through kind of the large population centers over in the east, through much of the south at this point, Memphis down into the 80s, and the heat now just lingering in the southeast. Saturday, Sunday, the cool down is on, and it's likely over a wide area here today, looking like it's going to be a pretty cool, well, relative to early August, cool and dry weekend with sunny skies across a large area of the Midwest. So hopefully a pleasant weekend to help starting to pick up, maybe some of the debris here in northern Iowa, or just get outside and enjoy not, like humid tropical soup that fogs up your glasses in 3 seconds when you walk outside. I do want to take this forecast. Let's take it one more, because by Monday, we do start to see, Monday and Tuesday, we'll start to see some temperatures rebound here across the central part of the country. Some moisture is going to start returning back into this area here, where I think precipitation is going to start coming back to this corridor as we get into early next week. But at least the weekend looking cool and dry over this area. We'll look at that precipitation conversation in more in depth in just a second here. I want to pull up the last 10 days. I showed you the average temperature map earlier that showed you that kind of maximum over Florida extending up in the Midwest. This is temperature minimums over the last 10 days, so the 18th through July 28th. Now I'm bringing this up because we saw at the end of June into the middle part of July, we saw values creeping up for those overnight lows increasing over 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and we just kind of added another episode to this over the last 10 days. In fact, if I probably bend this over the last 7 days, these values would be even higher here. But what this shows us here is that at least in the beginning part of July, and now adding the end of it here, that we're warmer than not in these overnights here over some of the ice states. So looking at different ways we can maybe kind of impact yield here, in the midst of what's a very good year, it would seem like, based on NDVI, some crop conditions, other metrics, and just frankly walking around or driving around the Corn Belt. I mean, there's just a lot of good looking crop stands in this wedge here, maybe save for some small areas here across Iowa that were maybe damaged overnight. Now, big picture, if we look at the radar mosaic across the continental U.S. here this morning, frankly, pretty quiet. We do have that kind of weakening storm system that we talked about across Illinois. Okay, 13 minutes. I think I can get through the end of this pretty quick. Yeah. Okay. I do want to jump over and catch us up on the current conditions here. So this is the radar mosaic across the continental U.S. There's that kind of lingering overnight system. You can even see still some convective development along it, right through the Mississippi River here in northeastern Missouri, western Illinois. Weakening showers here across northern Illinois, but otherwise, pretty quiet across much of the country, at least here this morning. Do you see some tropical moisture trying to surge up here into southern New Mexico? We've seen some flood watches and warnings kind of lingering in this area as a result of that. Again, otherwise, not too much to talk about other than that weakening system. Now, if we look over at the 500 millibar winds, this is similar to that plot I showed you earlier, but caught up currently. There's that ridge centered over a wide area of the country here. So not surprised to see those heat advisories, those extreme heat warnings kind of filling in underneath that. But at the same time, where's that flow? Where's that shear? Well, it's here over Nebraska, Iowa, Montana. That's that corridor where we're having kind of an overlap of that tropical moisture. With that wind shear, we're expecting additional severe development today. If we jump over and look at the 3-kilometer NAM, get an idea of where those thunderstorms are going to be developing today. I'm going to make this foul about 6 a.m. There's those weakening storms over Illinois. We go through the day Tuesday, expecting storm development, again, near I-80 through Iowa, Nebraska, portions of South Dakota. Again, some of these might be strong over a similar geography that we saw yesterday. See this kind of coalescing into a large complex here. This doesn't, to my eye, look like a, significant derecho event like we saw last night. It's somewhat disorganized, but we'll have to see. The exact nature of the evolution here isn't going to look exactly like the NAM is displaying here. The NAM tends to over-convect, so it produces more storms than not. And that might be muddying up the playing field, if you will. But we will have to watch the potential, again, for tornadoes, wind, and maybe some hail here across a wide area of the country. Overnight, that complex is going to push to the east in some fashion here through northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, maybe even to Michigan early tomorrow morning. And then storms likely to redevelop tomorrow across an area further to the east, right? So that marginal risk was extended to the east from the Storm Prediction Center. Maybe Illinois, Indiana, southern Michigan, seeing precipitation out of this. And then finally, as we push through the day, Thursday into the afternoon, as that cold front moves further to the south, if you remember those temperatures coming down, that National Weather Center forecast, the heat and the moisture now extending off to the east, and we're seeing storms trying to redevelop here as we go through the day on Thursday afternoon. Look at this in the ECMWF model as well. Let's take this into this afternoon. Then into this evening, storms developing, again, I-80 up into South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, southeastern Montana, all the way through northern Illinois and Iowa. See some signal of some stronger development overnight, even after midnight in northern Nebraska, maybe near South Dakota, western Iowa. Have to keep an eye on some potential flash flooding and wind threat here. So we go through the day on a Wednesday into Wednesday evening. Storms are redeveloping on a line here, maybe Kansas, Iowa, Illinois, western Indiana, southern Michigan. So this a little bit further to the west and north than maybe we saw from the 3-kilometer NAM that maybe had more of this activity through Illinois and Indiana. That is pushing overnight through that same area, so into Thursday morning, seeing precipitation coverage increase across northern Illinois, northwest Indiana, southwestern Michigan. This is an area that we brought up time and time again this year, being a little bit drier than average this year, with some drier soil moisture deficits kind of in that quarter here. That activity Thursday pushes off to the east. We talked about that thunderstorm development more so exclusive over toward the eastern seaboard and the coastal plain. And then Friday, big high pressure system. I know it's hard to see with these contours, but that's diving in out of Canada. That's what's helping to usher in that cool down as the air spins clockwise around that. And very little precipitation, likely a lack of cloud cover in kind of a wide area here, such that this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, end up being pretty nice across a wide area of the country that's dealing with either heat or thunderstorms in the meantime. We do see some precipitation picking up in the plains again, just kind of lightly on the back side of this high pressure system as to be expected. If we take this forecast a little bit further back, let's do kind of Friday and Saturday. There's Saturday, 7 p.m. Central. We do see precipitation picking back up, again, over the Rockies here in Canada, and then over the Canadian Prairie here. So southern, central, and even northern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, seeing precipitation tick up as we go through the day Saturday. That's important because this is an area that's going to be getting hotter over the next kind of 5 days through the weekend. So getting a nice precipitation in here at this time, I think, was beneficial. So we go into Monday and Tuesday, seeing precipitation values pick back up over the central and northern plains, and those start to extend on Tuesday and Wednesday toward the east in some fashion. The exact kind of nature of that's development is yet to be seen. We'll kind of anchor this down as we get further out of the forecast, but that is the kind of current projection of the temperature and precip conversation next week. I think we're going to warm up in this area as we go through the week next week. I'll show you why in just a second. When we jump over and look at this 500 millibar height anomaly, this is from the ECMWF forecast here. And there's that ridge over the middle part of the country that we talked about at the beginning. So I take this through Wednesday, and now Thursday. You can see that ridge that was anchored here and just kind of 48 hours later has pushed up here over Alberta. So there's that heat coming in on Thursday and Friday. You can see this upper level low here over California and Nevada. And that's helping to push through that cold front, that high pressure system that we talked about, into the Midwest, into New England as well. So going to Friday, now Saturday. And then critically, as we get into Sunday, you notice that the ridging, there's kind of one here, this one over Canada, And we also have the subtropical ridge that's trying to push in here near California and Arizona. But you notice that's kind of getting pulled a little bit to the west. You can kind of see it pushing out. If you take this forecast even into like Sunday and Monday, you can see it weakening considerably, kind of being pushed all the way over into the eastern Pacific. That's allowing some of what we'll call these lower heights or these weak troughs to move in on Monday the 4th. So the ridge here over Canada, these weak troughs moving in here to the central part of the country. These are all like little precipitation chances that are going to be moving through on Monday and Tuesday of next week. And what's interesting is what I think is pulling, we've seen this at times this year, pulling that ridge to the west is the tropical development. We've seen the central and eastern Pacific light up like a Christmas tree from the National Hurricane Center. In fact, if I jump over and show you the Pacific Basin, at least for the central and eastern Pacific, man, that's about as busy as that map's going to look this time of year. So I have Hurricane Iona spinning south of Hawaii, Tropical Storm Kelly to the east of that, maybe a potential additional system to watch over the coming days there. And then over in the far eastern Pacific, likely development, and then, an overlapping additional system maybe a little bit after that. So significant, convection and tropical development occurring in the central and eastern Pacific. And we've talked about how at times that has pulled this ridging, to the west, allowing some of these kind of weak troughs to sneak through on Monday and Tuesday. That's important because it's preventing ridging from re-anchoring here, and it's keeping precipitation values up in a corridor here, I think through the early part of August. If we jump over and look at the eastern Pacific, we talked about that MJO moving from the western Pacific across the central and eastern Pacific. I mentioned that at the beginning of this video. So it's not a surprise to see, convection tropical development pick up here. But boy, to see that busy of a chart from the National Hurricane Center, it's impressive. And you can see there's that area of spin that they're looking at in the far eastern Pacific for likely development. And I can see plenty of tropical thunderstorm development heading on now. But I do jump over and show you this is Hurricane Iona that's spinning south of Hawaii, fortunately staying well south of the islands here, moving to the west. This is a major hurricane. It's tight, it's compact, but you can see that clear kind of pinhole eye, as we call it. This is a looks like a Category 3 maybe we can get up toward Category 4 strength, but an impressive storm nonetheless, out over open water where we like to see them. And if I show you that forecast, expected to continue over the next day or so at major hurricane status before weakening to a hurricane, or non-major hurricane maybe I should say, and then tropical storm before it weakens, perhaps after that toward this weekend. But these can have a pretty long life because of the open runway through the Central Pacific when they do form. Pretty rare that they just do come up near Hawaii, but it does happen occasionally. We have to keep an eye on that when they do occur. Now, I mentioned that MJO conversation, which is going to be relevant as we get out into August, both for, I think, the ridging forecast over the central part of the country, which we'll look at in just a few slides, but also, Atlantic development of tropical storms and hurricanes. If that same MJO that's currently parked over the central eastern Pacific, you can see that ascent here in green for tropical development. If we move this and park it here, well, we just looked at the map of the central and eastern Pacific and how busy it is. Is that activity going to be coming back over into the Atlantic as we go through the next 10 days? So I'm going to look at that quickly here. This is the ECMWF ensemble. You'll notice as I take it into early August, we're now looking at August 2nd through the 7th. Do you notice how it kind of quickly migrated through the Atlantic? It didn't park this large area of ascent right over. The values are increased right now. They're starting to increase here, but we don't see a huge kind of area of ascent just park over the Atlantic. In fact, we see it quickly jump over Africa. We have to come to the other side of the map here and then start to get out into the Indian Ocean. Now, we can see a bit of a lag on this. So as it increases tropical precipitation over Africa, these start to form those monsoon-like thunderstorms, and then those eventually form African easterly waves that can come out days later. So even after the MJO passes, you can think of it kind of like kindling. It starts some sparks and fires, and then those take a while to congeal into a full-blown tropical system, even 5 days later. So just because the MJO passes over kind of in early August doesn't mean we can't get tropical development out of this. It's just sometimes lagged a bit. But I would guess kind of that maybe that first or second into maybe the third week of August, we might see a system or two sneak out into the Atlantic and become a cause for concern. Kind of good news if we're rooting it against this development here is the Atlantic has just been generally not a friendly place to be with wind shear and suppression over it. Obviously, with the MJO kind of moving over it over the next 10 days, that favorability is going to increase a bit, but there still is some background concerns with respect to development about storms either in training Saharan dust, which might continue to be a problem, or some wind shear out of the eastern Pacific. If we continue to see tropical development here in the eastern Pacific, that can throw wind shear across Central America into the Caribbean. It just acts like this big block kind of over this area here if systems try to get further to the west. And we'll have to see if that continues to be the case for some August development. Now, I do want to jump back. I talked about that hurricane conversation because it's pulling some of that ridging west. We just jumped through the ECMWF precipitation anomalies. If we look at the 7-day map there, again, not total precip, but by anomalies, you can see through the Canadian Prairie, so at least southwest Saskatchewan, there is some dry areas here with the heat coming. I showed you that ridging. We're still seeing this corridor of wetter conditions all the way through the Central Plains, maybe a little bit of a gap here over Arkansas in the mid-south. And then this kind of front lingering here as that cold front pushes to the southeast, it kind of stops. You can almost see where that front stops near Florida, and precipitation just continuing all the while through that 7-day outlook here, and then through portions of the mid-Atlantic as well. Now, some drier areas on this map, areas of Texas, into the Four Corners region, and then central and eastern Canada over toward Ontario and Quebec, and then into New England as well. We'll have to keep an eye on kind of Wisconsin and Michigan here. So while this corridor stays open, this ridging developing over northwest Canada, bringing this northwest flow through this corridor here, this lingering front, there are some areas of dryness to keep our eye on as we go through the next 7 to 10 days here. Look at the WPC, their forecast. This is, again, both of these forecasts here are 0Z. So these are going to include what has already fallen here in northern Iowa. So that's why you see these high values here. We're expecting additional precipitation over this area tonight, but what you're seeing in these kind of high value colors are what has actually already fallen here. And that is the case for the, I believe the WPC as well. Yeah, that's that 0Z forecast. And got to keep an eye on that. So I'll have to kind of, in your head, minus this precipitation that we saw overnight. But either way, you can see over in the east, the Carolinas through Georgia, Alabama, kind of cutting off somewhere here in central Florida, and then up through areas of New England, Boston, down through New York and Philadelphia. Excess precipitation on the way over the next 7 days, and this corridor through the middle part of the country with that northwest flow. Canadian Prairie seeing rain through Montana into the Dakotas, and then this kind of corridor here, again, Ontario through Quebec, pushing back towards central southern Canada. That's where we're seeing some dry areas kind of pick up over the next 7 days, and then Texas included in that as well. Now, the temperature conversation over the next 5 days, that cool down's coming through. So we're seeing those lower values here over the plains in the Midwest. We're going to be warming up a little bit next week, but it's not too significant. So I don't think we're going to be returning quickly to heat advisories and extreme heat warnings early next week. We still even see some kind of lingering cooler temperature values in some of these long-range forecasts. This is kind of out into the next work week here. We are going to see some moisture and precipitation chances return kind of during the next work week. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But even if I take this forecast out through August 8th through the 13th, I mean, we don't see a huge warm up here in some of these models. Maybe starting to see some ridging built into New England, building into the western U.S., but really most of the heat over the next kind of 5 days shifting off toward the northwest, even getting into the Seattle-Tacoma area, over toward Alberta, British Columbia as well, helping to usher in that northwest flow regime that we're expecting over the plains over the next 7 days. I'm going to jump over and look a little more long range here. So this is the ECMWF ensemble forecast at 500 millibars. I'm going to take this forecast quickly because we kind of covered some of this here. But if I get into early next week, this is Monday, now Tuesday, August 5th, we talked about those ridging being pulled toward the west over the Pacific due to some tropical development. We see a trough coming in here over the western U.S., and that ridge here now pushing more so over central Canada. This is getting out to the middle of next week. And we do see by late next week, that ridge that was kind of pushed off to the west here tries to push back in toward British Columbia here, perhaps picking up some warmth in this corridor here, re-strengthening that North Pacific high that's kept California so cool this summer. And then some ridging trying to build in here over New England. That kind of leaves this area open for additional thunderstorm development and cooler weather as we get out into August 8th and beyond. That's why some of those long-range temperature forecasts didn't go over much warmer in this corridor here. And part of that is precipitation as well. Clouds, moist atmosphere keeps the tops down on those temperatures. We are seeing potential ridging trying to redevelop here over the southwest, although some of these ensemble models in the long range just kind of put a ridge here by default. You can certainly see this kind of double ridge pattern that we've seen at times this summer that's been so favorable for storms and precipitation through this corridor here continuing. So at least right now from the ECMWF ENS and from the AFS, if I take that out to like August 10th, boy, you can see that double ridge in the middle of that troughing and precipitation over this corridor here. That pattern looks like it may be continuing through the middle part of August here, at least initially. We can kind of see this in the 8 to 14 day precipitation anomalies from the AFS That corridor stays open here. Have to keep an eye on the southern plains over toward the lower Mississippi River Valley. Have to kind of keep an eye on New England here and eastern Canada for potential dryness settling in. But fortunately, I kind of glossed over this quickly, and I didn't mean to. If I jump you back toward that precipitation conversation, I mean, we do have a lingering upper level low here, trying to get some precipitation in here to central and eastern Oregon near the end of this week. Over toward Iowa, that's Thursday. And then we talked about how Friday and Saturday, some of this getting up into the Canadian Prairie there on Saturday. But boy, if we can get that ridge further to the west, trying to get some precipitation in here to the northwest, see some values, not, game breaking by any means, but at least some precipitation would help in this quarter here if we didn't get, if we don't see dry lightning with it. We've just been so dry in this area here. So at least seeing something of maybe a tick up in improved moisture at times over the kind of 10 to 15 day forecast here. But I do want to jump back. Let's see if I can find my place. There's that AFS forecast. And see that corridor staying wet in this area here, including the southeast. If we jump back and trade the ECMW of ENS ensemble, again, this area here, drier toward the southwest, the southern plains, maybe over into the middle Mississippi, I should say the lower Mississippi River Valley, and keeping an eye on New England as well, seeing if we can get some rain into the Pacific Northwest, the Willamette Valley, seeing drought increase this year, and central Washington as well. Now, as we go out further into August, I understand I'm kind of getting at time here, 31 minutes, so I want to go through this quickly here. And I do want to show you this very quickly. I was talking yesterday on Twitter to a colleague of mine, Dave Brock, about the NDVI values this year, which are seemingly at record high over a wide area of high-producing states here in the Midwest. If we look at 2025, that is in this red color here. Now, I also noticed 14 and 16 in this conversation that he brought up that had wet Augusts. And these NDVI values for 16, which is in orange, you can see that line here, and yellow, for 2014, those NDVI values weren't, record highs at this point, but were, definitely on the top end of the distribution. They stayed high through August, even into early September. Now, this maybe kind of pushed harvest back a little bit, increased, drying, running later in the year. But we also saw 14 and 16, at least over the last kind of 10 to 15 years, have the highest yield above trend of almost any other year. So those two really stand out for their above trend yields. And it just kind of harkens to the importance of we're having a decent year and we can just add another good August to it. You're looking at a pretty impressive crop. And I think at least with that forecast showing the precipitation through this quarter here, keeping the tops off those high temperatures, boy, these were 2 wet Augusts and we saw a big yield. I mean, it just depending on if we can build heat into August, I think is a critical juncture at this point into, really having one of these massive bumper crop years, or maybe pulling it back a little bit with those overnight temperatures that we saw in June and July, combining that with a dry August, would take the top off a bit. So right now the trend is wetter, at least through the middle part of August. I do agree with Eric that we're likely still on this rinse and repeat cycle. We have looked this year multiple times that if the MJO gets back out into the Indian Ocean, like phase 2 or 3 in August, right, you can build in a big ridge into the Midwest, into the middle or late part of August. I kind of take that into, there's the later week of August, MJO phase 2, where it's trying to get to over the next kind of 10 to 15 days. Maybe let's look at phase 3. Eric kind of showed this yesterday. Phase 3 or 4 shows ridging across a wide area of the country here if we get toward late August. But I think we're kind of on this rinse and repeat cycle, or at least the middle part of August is going to be wet, maybe cooler. We'll certainly add some heat back to the area. In late August would be my guess, but if it's not persistent and we still have storms running over the top and diving back into the central part and the eastern part of the country, you're looking at what's likely to be a pretty decent crop at this point, at least based on a number of historical trends. So we'll track that as we get to it. If we do get that ridging back into the middle part of the country, we're going to see, I can almost guarantee it, strong thunderstorm development on the northern side of it, and maybe we're talking about derechos again in late August. Now, this is also a time period here that's kind of on that 5 to 10 day lag of the tropics and the MJO moving across Africa. So we might also at the same time seeing Eastern or African easterly waves make their way over toward the Caribbean. If they can get through some of the wind shear here, those can bring precipitation in another fashion and maybe break down some of this ridging. And of course, the central and eastern tropics making their presence felt this week. And that has been disrupting perhaps the ridge development that was wanting to form in the early part of August here. So a number of things to watch as we go forward. Eric's going to talk with you all on Friday. He is traveling tomorrow, so you get me again on Wednesday and Thursday. As for today, you guys made it through 32 minutes at this point, 35, so a little bit longer than I wanted to, but appreciate you following along, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow.